Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today's video is a really fun one. It is all about books that have made me cry, and this is a collaboration that was put together by Becky, and I will have everybody who's participating, their channels will be linked down below. Make sure you go and check everyone out. I love these big collabs. I think Becky has some really great ideas for videos, and it's just really fun. So this is actually a video that I was going to plan or to film during Vlogmas, and then I never got to it because I was thinking about it, because truthfully, I'm not a huge crier when it comes to books. Like, I feel like not that I'm like cold-hearted, but like I really need all of the circumstances to be aligning perfectly for me to feel enough to believe that this is tragedy or joyful, you know, because something else that I noticed as I was going through the books to put together for this video is that it's not always tragedy that makes me cry. A lot of these are romances. There's one that's not. And the thing that has made me cry in all of these is that moment, usually in a romance, when some type of suffering is relieved, whether like it's finally a declaration of feelings, or they're finally back together, or whatever. I'll get into it with each book, but something that makes me cry, I've realized, is when like hopes are fulfilled, or suffering is finally eased, or there's this one very human moment where another person saw and understood exactly how you felt. I love that so freaking much. So let's go ahead and get into it. And of course, the first book I have to mention, you're probably not at all surprised. Guess which book I'm going to mention. If you've been here for a while and you've watched my vlogs, you saw me cry as I read this, and it is Still by Kennedy Ryan. This is my all-time favorite book. This is my all-time favorite romance. This book will never be topped for me. I truly don't feel like there is ever going to be a better book for me than this. And the thing about this book is this is the last in a trilogy. So there's Flow, the novella, Grip, and then Still. And you do have to read them all in order because this is one couple's story, and you're not going to get the conclusion to their story. You're not going to find out how their romance ends if you don't read all three. But it is very well worth it. If you still haven't read this series, please pick it up. It is one of the most beautiful and emotional romances I have ever read in my life. It's basically about a white woman who she's sort of doing like music producing, and her brother is a very famous musician. His story is actually in another series of Kennedy Ryan's book, the Soul series, which I also really love. It's how she ends up meeting Grip, the hero. Bristol is the heroine. Grip is the hero. He is a black man. He's a rapper, and he is just absolutely enamored with Bristol when he sees her first when she comes to visit her brother. And thus begins this very epic journey that spans a lot of years of the two of them falling in love, trying to stay in love, falling apart, and coming back together, until we get what I feel like is one of the most satisfying happily ever afters that I have ever read in my life. Still deals with some very heavy content. I think that all of the trigger warnings are in my Goodreads review if you want to go and know what those are, because this book, like all of Kennedy's books, this one specifically does not stay away from heavy content that may be triggering or that may really, affect you in a lot of ways. But it is that specific content and the ultimate happily ever after that we get in this book that just had me absolutely weeping and a puddle in the floor. I just loved this book so much. But one of the things that I loved about this so much was the fulfillment of their love in their wedding vows. Kennedy wrote these wedding vows, but it's really like Grip is writing them to Bristol, and I actually have them printed, and I'm going to hang them in my house. I bought them from Kennedy's website. They're so absolutely beautiful. This book moved me in every possible way. It is my all-time favorite book, and I will never shut up about it, although I feel like I haven't mentioned it in a while because I talked about it in like every single video when I read it in 2021. It's fantastic, and yeah, I think that if you are emotionally ready and you haven't read this series yet, please read it, and please see it through to the end. There may be some things in this earlier on that might make you want to like not finish and get to Still, but please read Still. It is literally the best book that I have ever read in my life, and I've read thousands of books. Okay, so the next book that I want to talk about is actually a YA fantasy romance, and it is Strange the Dreamer. I recently reread all of Laini Taylor's books other than her middle grade books, and I forgot how deeply emotional this book is. It follows our hero Laszlo, who is an orphan, and he's been adopted by this like religious community, And there's a library. His name, they call him Laszlo Strange because he's a little bit odd, a little bit weird. He doesn't really know where he fits in. And he finds so much joy in this library, researching people's past lives, histories, and things like that. And he ends up finding about the lost city Weep. And he is just enamored with it, fascinated with it, can't stop learning everything about it, learns the language. And then one day, a delegation of people from that city pass through his town, and he's getting a chance to go travel with them and to find everything out about the city. While he is there, he ends up meeting a young woman through dreams. She is a goddess, a young goddess, and she is able to visit people in their dreams, and she meets Laszlo Strange in a dream, and they fall in love. And it is truly one of the most beautiful, wholesome, pure, first experience falling in love type of romances that I have ever read in my life. It is a little bit heartbreaking, absolutely. You definitely will want to finish this series because this book ends on a devastating cliffhanger. So if you've read this book, maybe you're thinking that ending is what had me sobbing, but it actually is not. There were parts of this book where Sarai, the young goddess, and Laszlo are meeting, and they're really just so tender and sort of approaching this feeling of new love with so much wonder and joy. It just like gutted me because it was so beautifully captured. I think if you have had an experience of falling in love for the first time, I think you would really enjoy this book because while this book is a young adult book, it doesn't feel young or juvenile. It feels very innocent and pure with those feelings of falling in love for the first time. I loved it so much. It's just absolutely beautiful. And Laszlo is one of my favorite characters, and he literally needs to be protected at all costs. Okay, so now this next book is a middle grade book, and it is A Monster Calls. This is a absolutely beautiful book. If you really like beautiful prose and high emotion, I would recommend this book so much because this little tiny book, it's also filled with some really haunting illustrations. It's basically a parable of a young boy who learns that his mother is dying of cancer, I believe, or some type of illness. She's dying, and he knows that she's dying. So the whole book is him sort of confronting his fear of losing her. She's his only parent. His father's not in the picture. And so his grandmother, who is kind of cruel, comes in to sort of take care of her daughter as she's ready to pass away. And the title, A Monster Calls, is, you know, it's metaphorical for this monster, this fear that he is trying to keep away because he doesn't want to confront the fact that he's losing his mother. This book literally had me a sobbing puddle on the floor. I just could not compose myself at all after I read this, but it was so deeply moving. You know, I talk a lot about books that I love that feel just so deeply human. They capture the human experience, something that feels very universal, that we have all experienced in some type of way, even if it's in a fantastical setting. Or maybe it's that fear of we will experience this one day. Something that connects us all as humans through fiction. That's one of my favorite things about reading, and that is what this book, A Monster Calls, is all about. It is breathtakingly beautiful. It is haunting. It is emotional, and it, instead of leaving you feeling really bereft at the way this book ends, I think it leaves you feeling definitely sad, but not completely hopeless. There's a little bit of hope at the end of this, and it's just stunningly beautiful. It was talked about a lot. They made a movie out of it. I haven't watched the movie, but the book is so beautiful. You could read it in an afternoon, and I highly, highly recommend this book. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is The Right Move by Liz Tom Ford. So this is one of the most recent books that I read and cried over, and I was really surprised. This is definitely a book that wasn't the sadness that made me cry. It was the expression of pure love and having someone see exactly who you are and what you needed and being so willing to give that to you. This is a contemporary romance. Our hero is a basketball player. He's super duper famous, extremely talented, at the top of his field, and the heroine is a little down on her luck. She is his sister's best friend, and she recently found out that her fiance was cheating on her, and so she has nowhere to go. She feels, you know, her confidence has been shattered. She's kind of really just trying to survive, and she ends up moving in, you know, with the hero, Ryan Shea, because Stevie, the sister, was like, look, could you please do my friend this favor? And he's like, oh, okay, whatever. So they're living together because she has nowhere to go, and she's a flight attendant traveling with the hockey team from the first book. And the way that this man loved her was one of the most pure, beautiful expressions of love and romance that I've ever read in my life. I think that even if you don't like contemporary romance, if you're more of a historical romance reader, I really, truly want you to try this book because it is so beautifully romantic. And I think that that feeling of deep romance that I have found to be so lacking in contemporary romances was in this book times 100. I loved it so much. It was just beautiful, stunning perfection, and everybody needs to read it. Okay, the next book is also a book that I read this year, and it is Children of Fallen Gods by Carissa Broadbent. So Carissa Broadbent is another author who fully captures that feeling of what it is to be human, and she does that through her fantasy books, sometimes with creatures or characters that aren't fully human. They're some type of fantastical race or being, and I just love that so much. How that's what I think makes fantasy really powerful, is when you have all these fantastical beings or plots or whatever, but it feels so relatable, and it feels like it captures this feeling of being human in a way that maybe a contemporary book couldn't. I think it also allows you to explore themes and ideas that feel a little bit safer because they're in a fantastical setting and it doesn't feel as close to home as maybe something contemporary would. So this book in here has two warring kingdoms, and we're following different timelines, different perspectives, and it was actually one perspective that I was not expecting that had me crying in this book, because there's a lot of mystery surrounding this other perspective, which if I tell you what it is, it's going to be a spoiler. We don't know who they are, we don't know why they're here, they're just this very powerful being, and so you're trying to figure out what happened to them, what caused them to be in this sort of sphere where they are not a person, but they're inhabiting the body of like Tizana and things like that, but they're still extremely powerful. When you find out what happened to them, it literally was so emotional for me, because you had grown to see them through book 1 a little bit and book 2. You grew to care about them, you grew to see their point of view, and that's something that I think this book does, this series does as a whole so beautifully, that I have not read in fiction done to this level ever. And it comes to its completion in the 3rd book, but that's where you have these opposing sides, these opposing wars, you know, these opposing countries, nations, people, and you are in both of their points of view. And so you see exactly how they came to war, how they came to be warring kingdoms, and you understand their perspectives. And you feel like if we actually had met this person first, maybe we would have been on their side. And I think that's such a rare thing to find in fantasy, where most of the time it's very clearly obvious who the villainous side is. You know, like I'm thinking about A Court of Thorns and Roses. We know exactly who the villain is in A Court of Wings and Ruin. We know who that villain is. It's not a surprise. There's nothing sympathetic about them, you know? And that is something that I loved so much that Carissa did in this series, is the way that she captured that sense of, this is somebody who is opposing the people that we have grown to care about and love, but are they a bad person? No, they're really not, you know? So I just loved this book. It made me cry. It was so deeply emotional for me and so very human. And I think this is what made me really love Carissa Broadbent's character-driven story so much, was specifically the 2nd book in Daughter of No Worlds, which to me was a 6-star and is probably going to be one of my top reads of the year for sure. So I love this book so much. Okay, so now the next one I want to talk about is The Spy by Sophie Lark. So this one was emotional for me in a way that I was not expecting. It is emotional because it's not with the main couple of this book. The thing that made me emotional is a reunion of a couple from a previous book, and then all of these books later, we finally get the answer. And I can't tell you more than that. But when I read that reunion, I was crying. I was so happy, and that's partly because I was already so invested in those characters. And I just posted this in my Instagram stories yesterday. Kurt Vonnegut is very fond of saying that the way to make good fiction, good storytelling, is to create characters that people care about and then put them in peril. And that is exactly what happened with all of these books that I'm talking about. Even if it's not mortal peril, if it's some type of, like, I feel like their emotions are in peril, that is what is done so well in all of these books. It's just peak storytelling, peak character building, great relationship building, and it just, I love it so much. So, The Spy, unfortunately, is the 4th book in the Kingmaker series, so you have to read all previous 3 books to get the moment that made me cry. But you also need to read at least 2 other books. So, But I will tell you, it made me very, very happy and very emotional. And I loved it so much. And that moment, specifically in The Spy, is one of the things that really cemented in my mind and in my heart what an incredible writer that Sophie Lark is. Because she just did such a great job of planting the seeds and getting you to care about these characters and just making you fall in love with them and worry about them. And there's construction happening right over there. That's what I get for filming in my car. Anyway, one more book. Okay, the last book I want to talk about is, again, The Magic by Lisa Kleypas. This is probably, it's so hard for me to choose a favorite Lisa Kleypas. This is up there. This is one of my favorite Lisa Kleypas books. It may be my favorite. It may be. It might be. It could be. But anyway, again, The Magic is an absolutely beautiful historical romance. It is the prequel to the Wallflower series because we actually get to see Marcus in this book. So this book follows our heroine, who is a lady, and the servant that she is actually in love with and has been, you know, kind of grown up with. They have this friendship that then turns into love, and they actually end up having this moment of passion. And somebody finds out about that, tells her dad, and her dad is ready to, like, devastate this boy, completely ruin him. So Aline, the heroine, is like, please don't, I'll do anything if you can just please spare him. Please don't do anything to him. I will do whatever it takes as long as you don't ruin him. So the dad is like, okay, fine, we will not destroy this boy, but you cannot see him anymore and he needs to leave. He needs to leave the country. So he ends up going to America, becomes a self-made man. He leaves devastated, believing that Aline doesn't love him. He thought they were in love, and he doesn't know any of this that's happened behind the scenes. He just knows that she is the one who's like, you have to go, I don't love you anymore. And the reason she said that, of course, was because she knew that if he knew that she still loved him, he would not leave. So she white fanged him there for sure. White fang, New Girl reference. When somebody pushes somebody else away in their relationship for their own good. Although I will allow it in this one. I will allow it. Anyway, so years pass. Aline ends up in an accident which leaves her with a disability and some thing that she is very self-conscious about on her leg. And McKenna, the hero, comes back to town, and he is determined to sort of destroy her, to ruin her for breaking his heart, and he's going to do that with, like, at all costs. But of course, the man still loves her, still has feelings for her, and she absolutely has feelings for him as well. And it's a little bit painful watching them come back together because he is not gentle with her at first, because he believes that she was cruel to him and rejected him, and he thinks that she ruined him, not realizing that she saved him. So the thing that makes me cry is after all of that, after we go through everything that they've gone through, all of the years apart, all of the damage, all of the tears, all of the pain, and they finally come together in that moment when McKenna finds out how Aline actually felt for him the whole time, it literally undid me, and it made me cry, it made me sob. It was just absolutely beautiful. This is the book, this wasn't my first Lisa Kleypas book, this is the book that made me fall in love with her as an author because it was beautifully done. I loved it so much, and it made me cry. So, alright my friends, there you have it. Those are the books that I love, that made me cry, and if you want to enjoy some emotional damage, I suggest you pick them up as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have made it this far, please feel free to leave me any type of flower because it's spring, and I'll see y'all in my next video.